when they went to the section that was on jumping, she and her horse would go up to it and then walk around.
Oh, boy.
Just checking to make sure we're on live. We weren't on live at the early service.
Oh.
We were having trouble with a server someplace, so but we are live now. So anything you say can and will be recorded online. We'll put the other up later this afternoon then. There were two handouts for you if you want. One is entitled Jesus' Trial Before the Sanhedrin, and they also have a piece on the back that we'll talk about later on. And then there's a 4-page handout of text today. We're looking at Mark chapter 14, verses 53 to 72, entitled The Kiss. So, interesting. Not sure. The kiss shouldn't be the kiss because we already had the kiss. We'll have to look. Maybe I put the wrong title on. Anyway. So, we'll start with a short prayer here on this 25th of April. We begin with prayer. Gracious Lord, again, we ask that you open our hearts, open our lives to you. As we look at this section, as Jesus is tried before the Sanhedrin, and as Peter has his opportunity to profess that he is one of yours and fails, help us as we listen to their stories. And may we be bold in our proclamation of you. May we live that out every day. We ask this in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. If you remember the last time we met, which seems like a long time ago, because it was a long time ago, we did a review over the stuff we had done the prior week, so we don't have a review this time. But I'd like to start with the page that's entitled Jesus' Trial Before the Sanhedrin. Much of this is borrowed from Dr. Volz in his Mark commentary, the second one. And what this tries to do is point out the basic parts of a trial before the Sanhedrin. And there were two elements of the trial. It's a combination of Jewish form, and we have the Jewish form actually comes from Josephus, a trial of Herod for his murder of numerous people. That's from Josephus in Antiquities. And also the trial form of the larger Greco-Roman context, especially out-used in the hinterlands like we see it here. And so these are the points. You can see some text there that you can look at if you're interested in where it talks about. So these are the basic points that happens. Jesus is seized by local officials, local forces, armed with weapons from the chief priests, the scribes, the elders, the local policing authority. He is not arrested technically. Krateo talks about being taken into custody, but not being arrested. There are no charges specifically at that point. Number 3, the oklos, or the crowd, assists. That was a normal thing in Jewish groupings. Number 4, he's taken to the high priest, who is the chief officer of the Sanhedrin, which assembles then with him in a trial setting. I think it's in the Mishnah, it talks about 70 people being in there, and I think it's the number of 23 had to be present, so it could be a quorum. The text will say that everyone was there, but we believe not everyone was there. What's one person by name that you know who had been a member of the Jewish ruling council? We come up to him in John chapter 3 and in John chapter... Nicodemus. So Nicodemus, I do not think would have said, yes, crucify him or something. So my guess is, this is just my guess, right, that the people that were there who were invited from the Sanhedrin were the ones to give him the answer that they wanted to get, probably. But that's a guess. But so we have them, he's interrogated by the high priest, he's questioned in response, witnesses are called to testify. There is no prosecutor, the witnesses kind of take that form. As a matter of fact, 2 witnesses have to agree. If they do not agree entirely, their witness is thrown out, and that's the problem that they have with the witnesses. We'll talk more about that. Jesus is beaten. We'll talk more about that too. I put in for the truth question. And so attendants or temple authorities are involved. It talks about that. And then his case is referred over, handed him over. Remember that the Jewish people did not have the authority, or the Sanhedrin did not have the authority to condemn, to carry out a death sentence. I guess technically they would condemn him, but they could not carry that out. It had to be sent on to, it would be Pontius Pilate would be the person here for the sentence to be taken care of. So this is a combination of kind of both forms of what the Jewish people had done in their history, but under Rome, there were some changes there, so it's a little combination. Yes, ma'am?
It said in that document, both goes through the trial of Herod. It's not really the trial of Herod, right?
No, this is a completely different trial. When Herod was taken before, and he was tried before the Sanhedrin in a separate incident.
Herod was?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
I'd have to find the exact place in Antiquities, but yes, that's what it did say.
Wow.
So it combines these two type things to come up with what we have.
Where did the trial take place?
The trial it's at the high priest location. It's at his home, and there would be a space in there for it. It's supposed to be a semicircle type thing where people would sit. I think you're kind of like we're here, kind of. It would be like this. You would be the members of the Sanhedrin in a couple, maybe 3 rows. And so the person under trial would be at the center. So it's not at the temple itself.
Okay, so it's not here at all.
No, not there. As far as I know, not at the temple at all. It's interesting. It talks about a courtyard that he goes in. Remember, it's Peter goes into the courtyard, and then he leaves the courtyard into the entryway type thing. So this is at the high priest location, which is a separate spot.
When we were in Jerusalem, we went to those catacombs, and they said that was where part of interrogation was taking place.
Yeah, but then they also, remember Caiaphas' house was way up on the hill, like, and that was where this was then.
Okay, so that might have been preliminary.
Yeah.
Just to get him,
Right.
and then, okay.
Okie doke. Shall we go on then to the text itself? First explanation, I guess, is that we have 2 events that are happening here, and the way it is written, the grammar even, it seems to express it. It's not one event happening, the trial, and then Peter after it. They are happening at the same time. And interestingly, at the same time Jesus is being interrogated, then Peter is being interrogated in these 3 different times. So these are happening in a concurrent basis. And that's interesting to note there. On the notes on the first page, we're at verse 53. They led Jesus away to the high priest, and all the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes assembled. Now, what's interesting to me is I didn't catch this before. I guess I saw it once, but it's been a while. The same word is used for high priest as chief priests. It's the exact same word, except there's one slight difference. Since I'm using the actual word instead of the various case, you'll notice that for the high priest, it's singular, and for the chief priest, it's plural. That's the only difference that I was able to determine in the text. So it's the context, it's the number. So the high priest would be 1, so you'll notice that there are different senses listed in each, but I found that interesting. So we have chief priests, elders, and the scribes. These are the people of whom the Sanhedrin would exist. Elders, it's interesting. Presbyteros, we have a group of Christians called Presbyterians that take from part of this, I think, from this word as well. This is an elder, and interesting, talking about an older person of the community, important in religious and social distinctions. One of the definitions was actually old man, so I'm not sure I like that part. That's one of the possibilities. But probably the elder as being someone of esteemed knowledge of an older person who has gained this over time. And scribes, of course, grammatis, M is sticking out there by itself. Grammatis is interesting because it's a person who can read and write. So you wonder how many of the other people could actually read and write, since that's one of the determining parts about them. And of course, another aspect would be that they were an expert in the law, the written and oral law as well. Verse 54, Peter followed him at a distance right into the high priest's courtyard. So there's where we're at. We're at the high priest's place. I can't tell you, I should have looked that up, didn't do that. If there was a, like President of the United States has a place where he stays, the Vice President stays. I don't know if that was true of the high priest, if there was the high priest's house already like that, could have been, but it kind of was in this family for a long time, so maybe it was a family home too. In the courtyard was interesting to me. Just an open air entrance place in there where they're hanging out. Some of the people are hanging out, and he was sitting with the servants, warming himself by the fire. Now that was interesting. It's actually the word fire is not there. It's the word for light, phos. So it's really, I think a better one would be he's facing the firelight. I think he's warming himself by the firelight. So the emphasis is less on the fire part, but more on the light that it gave. And why is that important? Because how many lights are there in Jerusalem at this time? It's night. If many people are sleeping, their lights would be out. There aren't the street lights, I don't think, like we have today. And so if this slave girl is going to be able to see him, she's seeing him by the light of the fire, that's kind of important. So he's facing the fire, and his face is facing that. I found that interesting, at least. So, verse 55. The chief priests and the whole Sanhedrin, again, I don't think everybody was there, but it had to be, according to the Mishnah, at least 23 members. They were looking for testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but they could not find any. They were seeking this testimony. It's interesting that the word for testimony is marturia, from which we get the word martyr as well. Interestingly, it is a witness, a testimony. They kept looking they were seeking this to try to put him. Their goal was not to find him guilty or innocent, but the goal is to put him to death, right? They had wanted to do this for some time. This whole thing, we're going to take care of it now, most definitely. For many were giving false testimony. That's kind of fun. Pseudo martyreo. This is a verb form with the pseudo, which would make it false. False witness, false testimony against him. And the testimonies did not agree. Now, why don't the testimonies agree?
Because they're making it up.
Not necessarily.
Same story.
It could be. I'm getting up to myself because I skipped a bunch of stuff here. No, I don't need that. Oh, here we are. I wanted to say, before I go there, Sanhedrin seeks witnesses because there's no state prosecutor in either Jewish law or Roman proceedings. They're seeking witnesses because this is required by law and practice. I mentioned unanimous, right? Had to be unanimous evidence by 2 witnesses. And I told myself to read this, so I have to read this. Since the Jewish judicial procedure, the witness functioned as the prosecution, they gave their evidence individually and verbally in the presence of the judge and the accused. If their respective depositions differed one from the other in even trivial details, they were inadmissible as evidence. The ready availability of witnesses for the prosecution suggests that they had been alerted that the arrest of Jesus could be expected momentarily, and that they were to appear on call. So that's kind of fun to think about. So why Jesus talked about the temple different times. The other interesting point is that if he talked about destroying the temple, in the Greco-Roman world, the destruction or desecration of places of worship was regarded as a capital offense. So if they could prove that, that could be, he said, I will destroy this temple. It's interesting that there are at least 3.5, maybe 4 different places where Jesus talked about that. Let me go through them. So it could have been made up, but my thought is that perhaps they were talking about different times Jesus spoke. And if we all saw the accident out here, we would each possibly see it slightly differently, right?
Yeah.
So to make it exactly the same, that's like all these videos now. If an incident occurs, they have these different videos from different things. This happens this way, you can see it that way. So it gets crazy, and especially if you chop videos up, right? I can do that too, where you can make it look different. It's not so nice, kind of wrong to do, but people do that. So let's see. In chapter 11 of Mark's Gospel, Jesus, this is the day after his entry into Jerusalem, he prophesied the destruction of the temple. So there's one place. In chapter 12, Jesus' parable of the wicked tenants in the vineyard the next day. Chapter 12, verses 10 to 11, he talked about rejected stone coming into preeminence. In John 2, there's a cleansing of the temple. Remember, there are possible 2 cleansings of the temple. And in verse 18 of that, or in verse 19, Jesus says, take apart this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up. Notice the future tense there, which is kind of important for what they're talking about. In the text in verse 58, I will destroy this temple made with human hands, and in 3 days I will build another not made by hands. We'll get to that text in a minute. And then in Mark 13, verse 1, not one stone will be left upon another after destruction. And there are some manuscripts, it's not in the one that we read, but after 3 days another will arise without hands. So it's possible that you saw one and we're saying it, Mark saw another, I don't know, Sharon saw another, and you're being honest about what you're talking about. But it could be different things. And the other thing, they could be conflating them together as well. But they couldn't use that then because they could not get 2 witnesses that said the exact same thing. Therefore, that is thrown out. So that part's gone. Mr. Tim.
Were these witnesses that came forward on their own, or were they?
It appears to me, I'm saying it appears to me that these are people that they had wanted to come. I don't think they just came forward on their own, but remember, they had folks watching Jesus, right? And I think these possibly could be some of those folks who watched Jesus, who heard what Jesus said, who were not neutral in the sense of, we'll just tell you what happened, but we're on the side of we need to get rid of this guy. That's my impression.
But the text calls them false witnesses.
I'm sorry?
The text calls them false witnesses, which would indicate to me that they're not telling the truth.
Or that their truth is slanted in one way or another, wanting this result. Yes. So I'm going to make sure. I saw Mark say that.
Yes.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Mark's being quiet just like Jesus was being quiet. Tim, a follow-up.
In the absence of a prosecutor, who would arrange that?
It would be the head of the Sanhedrin would be the high priest. And so it appears he does then take charge, right? Because he will directly question Jesus. That's coming up pretty quickly. So he would be the one I would believe would be in charge of that. Or he would tell someone to take care. We need witnesses, and I think they would use the people that they had been sending. Remember, these are 3 different groups. We have the chief priests, the elders, and the scribes. And in some of those, probably among elders, possibly among scribes, probably not, could be some Pharisees who were kind of behind the scenes as well. They were not priests, so we couldn't put them with priests. They were lay folk, but they would be involved as well. And all these groups have been trying to find a way to get Jesus. So that would be my understanding. Okay, anything else? If you look at verse 58, off to the side, you see you have the arrows for made with human hands and not made by hands. If you notice the word, if you look at it, there's one difference between the words. And it is the letter in Greek, it's an alpha. It'd be our A. You put an A in front of the word or an alpha in front of the word, and it becomes the exact opposite, right? Best example I can think of in English, it's one that just popped in my head, would be moral. If I put the letter A in front of it, it completely changes to the exact opposite, right? And so that's what this is. It's just made by humans or not made by human hands. And so that's the quote that they give. Yet their testimony, that's martyria, did not agree even on this. And so the high priest is unhappy, I guess you would say. And the way that the words sing, his volume, it's almost as if his volume's getting louder the farther he goes in, because he's getting upset as he goes through this. So he stood up, this is verse 60, before all and questioned Jesus, which is part of the trial process he could do. Don't you have an answer to what these men are testifying against you? This testimony they're giving. But he kept silent and did not answer. He was remaining silent, so that kind of catches that okay. But it was a continuing to keep silence, and Jesus was not answering. The interesting point is, by law, Jesus is required, the accused is required to respond to direct questions by the council, and Jesus was not doing what he was required to by law at this point. But that doesn't surprise you, right? I guess Jesus did that different from lots of people throughout time. Interesting, if you think about the whole emphasis on questioning about temple, they couldn't use that, but it's kind of messianic in thought, because the Jewish people believed that when Messiah would come, the glory of the temple would be restored to what it had been before. And so that's kind of behind all of this, I suppose, if you think about that. And so the questioning then, here's the interesting one. In verse 61, this is the question, right? Again, questioned him. And I think the voice would be getting louder, but that's my interpretation. Are you the Messiah, or the Christ? You can translate it either way. The Son of the Blessed One. Blessed One is circumlocution. I can't say that word. Circumlocution. I think I got it right finally. Which is a way to say God without saying God. Okay. Because they did not want to say that. It was too holy to say. So it's a direct question. Are you? And the answer expected is yes or no. So what does Jesus answer?
I am.
Now, when we see that, we think of Old Testament, we think of, God name type stuff. Yeah. I don't know if it could be. You'll notice that another time when he said that, people fell back because he said that. I'm not saying that here, so I'm not sure if they saw that in that way, or if it's just his way of saying yes. I think you can make an argument for either of those, to be honest. I don't know exactly which one.
But you said we get
commentators like to play that down, interestingly.
You said we get to the human hands and not made by hands, and you skipped over it, and I need that.
Oh, well, it's the same word. If you look on the right-hand column there under 58, where it says made by human hands, it's keiropoidetos, and not made is akeropoideros. So it's the whole thing of moral and amoral, putting an A in front of all.
But that sentence doesn't make so much sense then, because he didn't really say he was going to destroy the actual temple. He's going to destroy his body, but the body...
Now, technically what Jesus said is, destroy this temple, in 3 days I will build it again. And then the text explains that he meant the temple of his body. But the words themselves, if I'm listening to it, I could, especially if I want to find Jesus guilty, I'm saying he's talking about the physical temple in itself. So it's the gospel writer who says he was not talking about the building but that. So that's a slight difference there. Yeah. Okay. Are you the Messiah, the Son of the Blessed One, verse 62, I am, and you will see the Son of Man seated at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. How do you think that answer is going to go over?
Wow.
You're going to like that one? Son of Man is Jesus' favorite phrase for himself, right?
Yeah.
And at the right hand of power, power is another one of those words speaking of God without using the word God. And so if you're the right-hand person, what does that mean?
You're the most important person to God.
That's the second, number 2 person, right? Right-hand man, right, whatever. So remember we had James and John asking to sit at his right and his left. And so this would be, he's talking about having that position of honor and glory. And they are not going to like that at all. Definitely not like that. Verse 63, then the high priest tore his robes. When a person tears his robes, what does that mean?
A little upset.
He's really upset, right?
Yeah.
Really, really upset. And so this is a form of showing how upset one is. It's actually a plural for robes, and the commentators go into great detail about what that means, that he's not wearing his high priestly robes, but probably an inner and outer, wearing 2 tunics, possibly, at that point. So I don't know. I don't think that's that important, but just he's showing that what Jesus has said is wrong. Why do we still need witnesses? You have heard the blasphemy. What is your decision? And so you have heard with your own ears is the implication of the words that he has spoken to dishonor God by diminishing his majesty, by depriving him of rights of which he is entitled. And so Jesus, they said, would be guilty of deserving death. For blasphemy, what was the punishment according to the law? Anybody remember?
Stoning, wasn't it?
Stoning. Why wasn't he stoned? Because the Jewish authorities did not have that right anymore. Do you think that bothered them?
Yeah.
Most definitely. There is an exception to that. When could they stone someone?
Adultery.
Adultery. Yeah, we get that in John 8 and John 9, right? Jesus, when they brought the woman who was caught in adultery, have to be careful how you say that. Interesting. That's a possible one. But the one I was thinking about is in the temple. That if you were to go in beyond the courtyard of the Gentiles, because there were stones there, and apparently that was allowed. I've never read of someone being stoned, but I don't know if they did not. That's not where I read usually, I guess you would say. So interesting, you know. So he was deserving death. And so that means they're going to have to send him on, right? Have to send him on to the Roman, and that would be Pontius Pilate, that we'll catch up on later. Mr. Tim?
Wasn't Stephen who was stoned?
Yes. That's interesting. Now the question is, was that legal for them to do it or not? That's another thing. I mean, they possibly could have gotten in trouble for that. But for this type of crime, they did not have the authority to do what they wanted to do. And so it's interesting that the whole thing, some would suggest that actually they couldn't come up with this decision, and the way that it's written is interesting because the emphasis is he's subject to or he's liable to death is what he deserves. And I don't know, it's kind of interesting how they, I mean, it depends what type of commentator you're on, how much you believe in or how much you want to take away from, and so people do all sorts of stuff with it. I mean, you could write your own commentary on Mark, and it could
But
be
with
interesting.
Stephen, I've always had the feeling that what the temple authorities did was incite the mob and let the mob do their job. I mean, the mob could always stone somebody to death if they believed in that.
That's true. Well, we see mobs do things today,
That's right.
I guess you could
That
say,
are not legal.
which are not essentially legal as well.
Yep.
That's true. Yeah, true. Okay. Verse 65 is interesting. One of the things I was reading is that that by blindfolding and asking Jesus to prophesy, that there is a thread that Messiah should be able to tell who the person is, even by smell. And that's it was an odd thing I was reading, and I go, that's interesting. But to me, when you read verse 65, then some began to spit on him, to blindfold him, and to beat him, saying, prophesy. The temple servants also took him and slapped him. Now, servants there could almost be guard type things, because remember, there were temple guards there as well. And we'll talk more about them later on as well. Interesting, if you look at some of the Isaiah in chapter 52 and 53 about the suffering servant, these are the types of things that happen. It said that God's servant would be spit upon, they would cover his face, they would buffet him, they would take him with many whacks. It's an interesting thing. He would be maltreated. And so Jesus is being treated as a false prophet. He's being mocked for it. And so they treat him in this poor way. I mean, he will also be treated much more poorly by the Romans later on. And so Jesus is condemned as deserving death. He is going to be then taken, as you know, to the Romans, and that will be coming soon. But concurrently, we have Peter. It's interesting how these are happening at the same place. The time when Jesus is being spoken to, as Jesus is being tried, in a way Peter is as well, in a slightly different way, however. But it's happening, and the way the words are written emphasize the concurrence nature of that. Verse 66, while Peter was in the courtyard below. The courtyard, he's close in. Ale, we've heard that before. One of the high priest's maidservants. It's interesting, John seems to think that this is a very important servant woman, almost like a porter, if you will. Portress is what one translation puts it. She comes, and when she saw Peter warming himself, remember he's facing towards the firelight, she looked at him. Now, the looked at him is interesting to me in verse 67. As a matter of fact, I highlighted the part that caught my attention. Looked intently at him. So she's not just going, oh, it's like she's looking at him, keeping him in her eyes. You also, you too. And the form of the Greek is interesting there because it places the you and it's and you literally, kai su, and you, which is not how they would normally, the you would be back farther, but it's emphasizing, it's trying to emphasize it. And you also, you too, were with Jesus, the man from Nazareth. Now, in John's gospel, there's a hint that this woman may have been one of the who went to pick up Jesus, but it doesn't actually say that she did. But there are lots of commentators who would like to encourage that. So it's possible, I suppose. But she knew that somehow that he was one of those with it. Verse 68, but he denied, ane omai. Sorry, he repudiated this. It's not true. Interesting. I don't know or understand what you're talking about. What are you saying? I have no idea. No, it's not me. Then he went to the entryway. It's interesting. He goes to the forecourt, the gateway. So he's getting farther out. In my mind, he's getting closer to run. That's what I see. It's getting too hot inside, so he's coming farther out, and he doesn't want to be as close so that it's easier to get out if he has to make a quick getaway. And he denied it, and a rooster crowed. I've italicized and a rooster crowed because that, interestingly, does not occur in all the texts. As a matter of fact, the main texts that are the ones that are thought to be the most accurate, the oldest and from the best areas do not have those words in it. And so the question is, so what's it there? And some would suggest that copyists have added that because later on, and I looked at the various other places where it talks about rooster, and if I remember right, the only time it talks about a rooster crowing a second time, and you'll see that in verse 72 here, and that is in the text of all the texts that we have of Mark, that it's not in Matthew, Luke, or John. It just says, and the rooster crowed, but it didn't say a second time. Now, I found it interesting that a rooster crowing is a fun thing to think about. And where did that go? Well, that's way over here. Lane, apparently. Oh, here we go. There are 3 times between midnight and 3 a.m. that the rooster crows. I bet you didn't know that. I didn't know that. Is that true of all roosters here in this country too? Do roosters crow 3 times? No.
I don't think so.
Maybe, I don't know why, but Lane was in, this is what Lane wrote. Observation over a period of 12 years in Jerusalem, so he was there for 12 years, has confirmed that the cock crows at 3 distinct times. The first about an hour after midnight, the second about an hour later, and the third time an hour after the second. Each crowing lasts from 3 to 5 minutes, after which all is quiet again. So I don't know why they do that. I always thought that roosters crowed at sunrise.
Yeah.
That's in Provence. That's what Dom's.
But apparently, at least here in the Middle East, that's what his observation was. And actually, the 3 a.m. is, the time is like cock crow is called that. So it's an expectation that the rooster would crow at those times. And so if those are true, which apparently he's trying to suggest are, that it would be about an hour between each. So that when the rooster crows here at this time, if it actually crowed at that exact time, then there's an hour time frame. So can you imagine being there? First of all, we should say that Peter, we should commend him for actually being there, right? Following.
Yeah.
But then he's nervous
Yeah.
all the time, and I think that's a reasonable fear to have. Yet Peter is the one who said, even if everyone else falls away from you, I will not. And he had his opportunity. And, well, he's going to fail, isn't he? What would you do then? Would you have even gone? Would you have gone to the courtyard? I think it's John's gospel that we have, that it was John who somehow got him in.
Yeah.
If I remember right.
I think I
Would you have
gone,
gone
but I
to the
know I
courtyard to see what happens?
Yeah, this is something that just keeps coming up and up and up in history, because there's lots of times when you could make a declaration about who you are and what you stand for, but you weigh that against, if I do that, like there was a Christian Chinese man that I read about the other day, by standing up and refusing to say he wasn't a Christian, they killed his whole family. Well, maybe I'd want to say, well, I'm wishy-washy or something, save the family, but it is hard. Keep saying, I'm following you. I don't know.
One of the first controversies in the early Christian church dealt with people who would renounce faith in a situation like that. And some said you had the opportunity to speak publicly and you chose not to, so you were thrown out of the church. And others said that they should be able to repent, or as suggested, that they're kind of doing the king's cross my fingers, king's X, and it's okay. I really believe that I'm saying this for the future type thing.
Yeah.
And that was one of the big controversies. It's interesting, though, if you think that this extended information about Peter is in this gospel, because, again, we believe this gospel is written by Mark in Rome, and the first audience would have been Roman Christians and we've talked about being under persecution, right?
Yeah.
Peter has an opportunity here. It goes into a lot of depth in this one about Peter's failures, and yet it doesn't remain a failure because Peter, had the opportunity. As a matter of fact, it's here in Mark's Gospel where the ladies are told, go tell his disciples and Peter mentioned by name that he'll see you in Galilee, right? Those type of things.
Yeah.
And so it's in John's Gospel, into John's Gospel, chapter, I forget, is it chapter 21, 22? Chapter 21, I think, where there's that extended thing. They're at the seashore. Remember, they're fishing out there, and so it's Jesus is at the seashore, and he has some food cooking for them, and so they can see him eat fish. And it's the 3 times, notice that number again, 3 times Jesus asked Peter, do you love me? If you did, he says, yes, Lord, you know I love you, feed my sheep. Second one was feed my lambs. And the third time, do you love me? Yes, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. Then feed my sheep. And so we talk there about Peter being restored, if you will, I guess, from the 3 again. And I think all of those together would help the Roman Christians then of that, if someone like Peter, who is this now leader of the church thing, if he can do this and be restored, then I could be too. And so I think that's why it is extended here in detail, that Peter had the opportunity and he missed it. Now, I'm not saying I'd do any better. I probably wouldn't even gone. I'm sure you all would have gone since you're much braver than I. I'm not sure I'd even go there, because that'd be kind of scary to be there. These are the people who can, and it's that first lesson today in Acts. It's interesting, Peter standing before this group of people who condemned Jesus to death, and he's quite different in this time. And so that would be helpful as well. I think it's Judy first, then Tim.
But in that, because I'm reading it today, he was filled with the Holy Spirit. So that's what I was wondering, is there a time where, again, Pentecost or that?
Yeah, so think of what's happened. He's been restored by Jesus, the end of John's Gospel. Then we have the Pentecost. Even before then, he's seen that Jesus is alive. Remember, Jesus says, it was in Luke's Gospel last week, here's my hand and side. And to me, the implication is the disciples got up close, maybe even touched, and of course, I missed the week when you had the quote, doubting Thomas, which is technically disbelieving Thomas, the text says. Interesting, that I think Thomas just wanted what everybody else had. But Peter has seen that, so he sees Jesus' life. He's restored. At the end of John's Gospel, we have Pentecost, where he's filled with the Holy Spirit, and that's when we start to see a change. Peter proclaiming and such, that was the first one, and then there's this one. And then, the children's message is from, is it Acts 12, 13, something like that, where we talk about Peter, who then he had been captured, but he's going to continue on, and then the people are as well. So something change has happened, and all of that change, I think, is important for those Christians to see, that if Peter could mess up so bad and be restored, we can too. Because he's not then, if it's all made up stuff, you're not going to show yourself to be have messed up so poorly, I think. You would show yourself to be great and mighty all the way through. I don't know. I'm sorry, Tim.
As we were talking, I was thinking of the Columbine incident, and that young girl, when she was confronted by the killer, and are you a Christian? And without hesitation, she said yes, and he shot her.
Interesting question. What would you do if you were faced with that dilemma?
But it wasn't taken by the fact that apparently she didn't even hesitate. She said, yes, I am.
Michael W. Smith has a song, This Is Your Time, that speaks about that. It was interesting. It's a pretty good song, and he liked it, and I think he got sick of it because people continue to want, if you have a song that people like and you go and do things, people want you to keep doing it again and again. And at one point we heard him live, and he said, well, I know you all want to hear this, but I'm kind of getting tired of it. I mean, that's kind of difficult to do, I would think. Anyone here ever do concerts like that and have a hit song? Apparently not. Okay. So let's see. So we've done the rooster crowed. It's, possibly, they wonder if, we did that part. I guess we're at 69. Then the maidservant saw him again. So you'll notice that she has He's gone out, right? Yeah, he's gone out to the entryway. So she's followed along and began to tell those standing there, our bystanders again, this man is one of them. But again, he denied it. Nope, it's not me. After a little while, those standing there, our bystanders, said to Peter again, you certainly are one of them, since you're also a Galilean. How did they know he's a Galilean?
Wake up.
The way he talks, possibly the way he dressed. There are some words in there that aren't translated that I was looking at, going, why aren't you translating these? And some of those almost indicate the way he was speaking, but it's one of the Gospels actually says that they could tell because. There's also, I was reading about that people in Galilee couldn't make some of the guttural sounds that were part of the language, and so that's one reason you could know they were Galilean, because they had a different accent, a different way in which they spoke. When you go around to different parts of this country, people in upper New England, they kind of swallow their R's or something, and people in the South have a tendency to drawl. We had a lady in Bethesda who was from Louisiana, and whenever she went back home, she came back to Bethesda with an amazing, really thick brogue, if you will, different ways. So they find out, hey, you are Galilean. That means you must be one of them. My goodness. And then it comes, verse 71. He started to curse and swear. I don't know this man you're talking about. Now that's pretty blatant, if you will, of what he's saying. Cursing. The words that are used there, and it can be translated that he was calling down a curse upon himself if he were lying, or he's calling down a curse on the people there if he's telling the truth. And you notice he doesn't even say Jesus or the Nazarene or the Galilean. He doesn't say that this man. And so this is the Peter who in Mark chapter 8, verse 38, you are the Christ. He's not able, willing, whatever, to say that at this time. He's fallen a long ways from where he had been before. On the back side of the handout, the first handout I gave you, there's a quote from Lane that my notes say I'm supposed to read at this time. It says, this is from Lane's commentary on Peter's denial and how important it was with Mark's first audience. Let me read it for you, especially if you're watching online and didn't get this stuff. The tradition of Peter's denial was undoubtedly included in the gospel to provide a sober example to the Christian community in Rome. The fact that it is intimately tied to the account of Jesus before the Sanhedrin emphasizes the integrity of Jesus in his confession and the faithlessness of his disciples who refused to acknowledge his Lord. Preparation for this pointed contrast was provided in, these are my numbers, 1, in the account of the sleeping disciples in Gethsemane who failed in the disciplines of vigilance and prayer. Secondly, in the reference to the futile attempt to defend Jesus with a sword. And then third, to the distant and hesitant following of Peter. This was the primary significance to Mark's readers, whose faith was severely tested by the measures adopted in imperial Rome to stamp out an unwanted sect. The fact of Peter's denial constituted a solemn warning that a bold affirmation of fidelity did not guarantee faithfulness. It constituted a plea to hold fast to one's confession of Jesus, but it also provided a word of encouragement that one who failed his Lord through denial could be restored, for the episode recounted in chapter 14 remains incomplete without the promise to Peter in chapter 16, verse 7, that he will experience forgiveness and restoration in Galilee. And that's where I wrote my note. In this light, see John 21, 15 to 19. That's the threefold restoration of Peter. And so Peter's issues there, if you will, are important, especially for this group of people in Rome in that way, I think. Verse 72, immediately, that's our old friend Euthus. Immediately, a rooster crowed a second time. And like I mentioned, I believe that's the only time the word second is used. Usually the rooster crowed. And Peter remembered when Jesus had spoken the word to him. Rima, it's an interesting word to me. Before the rooster crows twice, you will deny me 3 times. And he, that's Peter, broke down and wept. You say that you're going to be faithful, no matter what. Even if everybody else falls away, I won't. And here's his opportunity not. And if it's true that Michael Card says that he believes that Peter was Jesus' best friend, then this is Jesus' best friend who's denying him at a time when Jesus needed all the friends he could have, if you think about it. And you'll notice how people continue to be peeled away from Jesus till at the end, he is alone. And especially when we get to the cross, right? Even when his Father turns his back on him, if you will, he is totally alone there. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's pretty big stuff. And so here's Peter has his chance. Again, I don't want to come down hard on Peter. I am commending him that he went there in the first place, because I don't think I'd have the fortitude to do that. But my namesake, James, apparently is not there at all. It's not one of them, although John got him in. Interesting.
Is there any indication that there were other apostles in the courtyard other than Peter?
John had apparently been there to get him in, but he's not mentioned by name. So the only ones that are mentioned that I have ever seen, obviously Peter and John there, and I don't know how long he was there, if he just kind of got him in and left or not. I wonder, this is just me, no, I guess it's at the cross, so I can't say. I was going to say that I wonder if John went to be with Jesus' mother, because he was, but that's at the cross when he's told that that's going to be your mother. But as far as I know, there were none other listed. What apostles were at the cross with Jesus?
John.
John, right? Anybody else? Can you think of anybody else? No, the women were there. Way to go, guys. So apparently no one else. This is a pretty detailed description. Can you imagine Peter telling Mark, you got to write this down?
Yeah, wow.
There's somebody else over here. We're going around. Tim?
I think that question.
Okay.
It's 3 a.m., the first watch of the night.
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
That's that would be the one-ish, 12 round time in there. I think. Now that would be 3 a.m. is cock crow.
Okay.
When the rooster crows, although Lane says an hour every hour on the hour.
Well, and I was just thinking that he could have just said before 2 a.m. you're going to deny me. 3 times.
No, apparently it would be before it crows again, and it's true. So a second time, interesting. So maybe that rooster only crowed twice that night instead of the 3 that Lane saw. That's interesting. So next time you go to Jerusalem, stay up all night and listen to see if there's that 1, 2, and 3.
Well, I think we heard him, like you're saying, when the sun came up, but now.
And that was in Provence. So
Yeah,
I don't
that's
remember
true.
any
That was in
roosters
Provence,
in
right.
Jerusalem.
Maybe they're special roosters.
Maybe. Time-telling roosters, right?
I don't think people.
Let's
keep
see,
happy.
what else was I going to see? This is from a fellow named Gundry. Gundry talks about the escalation of Peter's denials. Number 1, Peter says he doesn't understand what the maid's talking about. Number 2, Peter denies being among those with Jesus. And number 3, Peter curses, possibly Jesus or bystanders, he suggests, and swears that he does not know this man. And of course, he can't bear to say Jesus' name or anything else about him. And I'm sorry, it was chapter 8:29. You are the Christ. You are the Christ.
But that's 8:29 clearly says that Jesus said to him, you couldn't have said that on your own anyway. It's the Holy Spirit talking.
Right. Yeah. That's true, but here he's not able to say it at all.
Right.
So, and interesting, again, happening at the same time. You'll notice that this doesn't say that Jesus was being moved and that he looked at Peter. That's in another gospel. It's not here in Mark's gospel, that little detail. And so you wonder why it's not here and why it's there. Can't answer that question. So that would be interesting. I found it fascinating to look at that word of she's looking, the maidservant is kind of really watching Peter, keeping her eye on him, that you were with him. Nope, not me. And then when Jesus looks, what type of look would Jesus look at them?
Sorrow, yeah.
Can you imagine how that would have hurt to see that type of look
Wow.
of, Peter saying, oops, Peter, remember when you said, it wasn't an I told you so look. I think it would be one of sad understanding. I know that the flesh is weak, because obviously he had trouble that whole night, where they're falling asleep. Think about that, all that Peter went through. Peter fell asleep, couldn't watch. He took out the sword. He's the one that takes the sword, right?
Yeah.
And takes slash. He's told not to do that. And here he has an opportunity to say, and so every time he tried to step up, he failed that night. So that would be a difficult night for him to remember. Interesting. Other thoughts or comments? Tim has one that looks like a question.
And I think even our closest friends, we're sometimes disappointed, but I think for me, he's hanging on a cross and says, questions whether his father has given up on him. That had to be the lowest point of his life.
Well, it's interesting. We'll get to that soon, to Jesus on the cross. But it's interesting that when we talk about the 7 last words of Jesus, it's actually the 7 last sayings, because some of them are longer than a word, right? But each one has different, and not each gospel does not have all of them in. And so one of the questions, I guess, would be is why are these here? Why did one choose one and not the other? Or what? Luke said, I went to ask all of these. He went to try to find witnesses of all these things. So why couldn't he have all of them? I don't know. And if John wrote at the end, then he's kind of telling all the stories that sometimes they didn't tell because it was too soon, perhaps. I don't know. But that's all I have, unless you have something else. Questions, comments? Anything else?
Just a comment. Of all the places that we went in Israel, the most meaningful to me was the beach, because it turns out that there's probably only one beach that was suitable for this to have happened. And so that beach where Peter was restored, it made my flesh, it made the goosebumps come up. I mean, you could really feel what that would be like. It was wonderful.
Never thought about that. Is that the same beach from which Peter was called?
I don't know.
That would be interesting.
That could be. That's a very interesting
Probably
because there's a lot of fish in there, and we actually got to have one. They're called St. Peter's fish, and it's the most fish gathered right there. So fishermen would know that's where they needed to be. But the other part of that was, I always thought of that as a very private thing when the restoration happened. But the guide pointed out that there would be lots of fishing boats right there to see that.
So how far from Capernaum would that have been?
It's a ways.
From here to the main part of town?
No, longer than that. Yeah.
Okay. So it's out of ways. Okay. All right. Done? Anything else? We're going to be done in a few minutes. Hey, when we finish our prayer, we'll be out at our quarter till. So let's have a short prayer. Heavenly Father, help us as we take these words, ponder them this week, open our hearts as we continue to seek to understand, and help us see that even if we, like Peter, fail to follow through with our promises to you, that like Peter, we can be restored. That as we face the light, Jesus, the light of the world, we can have that restoration. So bless us in that, we ask in Jesus' most precious name. Amen. Yeah, that brought up the other thing. We'll probably get that in the notes about the he's facing the light. Some suggest, besides just physical, it's also metaphorical, that he's facing the light of the world. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could be.
We'll see.
So if you're watching